as long as there have been gardens, there have been garden tools. Hi, I'm Paul Dorsey, and today we're going to take a look at a variety of basic garden tools, see how they're used, and see how we can maintain them. Let's get started. The shovel is probably the most frequently used tool in the garden, and which one you select depends on which kind of job you have to do. Today we picked out 4 that we think represent the ones that you probably would use in the garden. They include the round point shovel, a garden spade, a transplant shovel, and a garden fork. But before we get into each one of those, let's look at the shovel and some of the differences you're going to find when you go to purchase it. First off, the shovels all have handles naturally, and they can be made of different materials. Lots are the old ones, and some of the new ones are still made of wood, fiberglass. Some shovels are all stainless steel, and some are steel. The handles fit into an area. Here is a collar or a socket of the blade itself. The blade can be made 2 different ways. It can be stamped steel or it can be forged. The stamped steel is generally made by taking a flat piece of steel, all the same thickness, and a machine comes down, stamps it into its shape, and it's wrapped around a handle. The forged shovel is generally made out of a much heavier piece, and it's banged in by a machine instead of a blacksmith, of course, into the shape. And it varies in thickness because it is a thicker material to begin with. Thick through here and thin towards the end. They generally have a high collar here that supports the shovel handle extremely well, and it usually has a number of rivets. They're generally well made, but they're also very pricey. You can purchase a regular garden shovel, which is quite adequate, from a big box store for $20 to $30 generally, and get a good one. Or you can invest in a forged that definitely will last a lifetime, but they generally begin probably closer to $60 and up. So the first shovel we want to talk about is a common shovel everybody recognizes, the round point shovel, and it's used for starting gardens, turning over the soil, digging holes, generally just moving dirt. The garden spade is constructed a little bit different. It generally has a D handle, a shorter handle, for more precise close-in work. It's narrower, has a square bottom, which makes it very good for edging your soil beds, maybe chopping or dividing plants. The transplant shovel, much like the garden spade, has very little curve at the end. It's very narrow, so you have more force when you push down onto it. And this is generally for transplanting plants where you want to dig down, make a circle around them and lift them out, or loosen a plant that wants to maybe give you a little trouble getting out. The garden fork is constructed a lot different than your old pitchfork. They're flat, more rectangular. Most of them have round ends and not points like these. This one happens to have. They're exceptionally good for loosening up your soil for your bed when you're adding compost or something like that. And for the round ones, they're very good for digging out your potatoes, because the forks generally are less likely to penetrate your potatoes. Just a quick word about rakes. We're all familiar with rakes, especially now that the leaf season is beginning. Rakes have been around almost forever. It's documented back in 1100 BC in China. They were used to gather hay and grain. There are 2 basic kinds of rakes that we're familiar with. That's the lawn rake and the garden rake. Rakes have been designed pretty much the same as They've been since the beginning of time. Essentially, they're equipped with tines or fingers like this to move material from one place to the other. The leaf rake comes in two configurations. Some are plastic and they're inexpensive and they're very good for raking leaves. We have a metal type, which used to be the only one that we used to have. And not only is it good for raking leaves, but it's also good for scarifying the lawn and getting out thatch and things like that. Also, they have a new invention, a relatively new invention. It's called the telescoping rake. And it folds up to nearly nothing. And what you can do is you can use it in real tight spaces underneath the bushes and shrubs to get out those pesky leaves, or it expands out to act like a regular lawn rake that we're familiar with. The garden rake, or the more traditional rake, generally has a large metal top here with, like I said, tines or fingers, and it's generally used for more difficult tasks like cleaning up areas and moving rocky place. And it could even be used for cultivating. My favorite use for this is breaking up soil and leveling out the garden beds for landscaping. When you think of garden tools, the hoe comes to mind as much as any other tool. And they have many different types of garden tools in different sizes and different shapes. Includes the paddle hoe, the Dutch hoe. This is a common garden hoe with paddle hoe. They're generally in two different configurations as far as I've learned. You have a hoe that either pulls or one that pushes. The pull hose is generally used to dislodge weeds or mound up soil, cultivate soil. The push hoe is generally, because of the pushing motion, is generally to cut weeds, and it generally will have a flat blade. I don't happen to have one here like that. And then we also have a combination of both the push and pulling motion, which is sometimes called a stirrup hoe, a hula hoe, a shuffle hoe, and the head of this hoe moves back and forth, and it's used to dislodge weeds without hurting the soil too much. It just skims underneath, and it does an extremely good job and very fast in removing those weeds. Today we're going to look at a variety of tools used for pruning, from large to small. It's important to use the right tool for the right job, because you can not only injure the tool, but moreover you could injure the plant. We're going to look at these tools from the smallest to the largest. And in actuality, you carry with you at all times a very, very small pruner. This is excellent for pruning tomato suckers, pinching off flowers when you need them. It's never rusts and it has a lifetime guarantee. First, we'll start out with a pair of pruning scissors. They're actually like any good made scissors that you might have around the house. Good for pruning roses. Here again, some small succulents, some vegetables. And the good thing about these is you can actually take them apart and clean them. If you had one overall tool for pruning, that's the only one you could have, that would be the hand pruner. While the scissors are used for something, or little branches or vegetation less than 1/4 of an inch, the hand pruners are generally used for branches less than 3/4 of an inch. Now, depending on the quality or type of pruner, they'll each be able to accommodate different sizes. Depending on the quality of the pruner and the size of the pruner, that up to 3/4 of an inch will vary. This pipe is 5/8 of an inch, and as you can see, this pruner will easily accommodate it. Where on the other hand, this pruner here could barely do the job. So we wouldn't want to be using this pruner on this when it's not the proper tool. There are two different basic types of pruner blades. One, we have the bypass pruner, where the blade is sharpened on one side and it passes this flat surface, much like a scissors. Then there's the anvil type, which is sharpened on both sides of the blade. And when you cut down on a flat surface. The bypass pruner is generally the one that's preferred. It gives a good clean cut, which helps prevent disease and insects from getting in. The anvil type pruner is good for more or less for more dead branches, harder branches, because it will tend to crush the fibers in the branches. Within the pruner family, there are lots of choices to be made. You can spend a fortune or you can spend a little bit. The real thing that's important is comfort, fit, ease of use, and how they feel in the hand. And this is all a matter of personal preference. That one was a bypass. This is an example of a anvil type. You can see the surface there. This is not in real good shape, but it's old. This is an example of a ratchet type pruner, generally for people that might have trouble, with their hands, arthritis or something like that. It'll actually ratchet up as you cut down on the branch itself. This is an example, both of these are example of ergonomic handles. You can see when I rotate, or when I close it, the handle will rotate. And this makes a very, very comfortable pruner. I like this pruner. I've learned recently that you can spend a lot for a pruner and it not turn out to be the one that you want to use. Not pointing out any particular pruner, but the expensive one, when I opened it up, was way too large for my hand. So that took all the value that I had in that pruner out for me, because I'd always constantly have to have my hand closed. So the most important thing that you want with a pruner is one that's comfortable, that fits, easy to use, and it does the job. Moving up to the next size branch that we're going to be working with, we'll need to use loppers. Now loppers will accommodate anywhere from 3/4 inch to 1.5 inches. And here I have 3 different loppers. And the same as with the hand pruners, the blades are the bypass, which gives you that real sharp cut. In this case, we have an anvil cut. And this one, which is a very old tool that I've had for a long time, is also an anvil cut. This one and this one are both ratchet cutters, which means you can, when you put down, get on the limb and slowly ratchet up, it takes a lot of the strength that you need to cut out a branch. And this will cut 1.5 inch branch with no problem at all. This one is much the same. I got this years and years ago. It's sort of worn out now, but it worked wonders. And it was very lightweight. I loved this tool. Now the good thing about the loppers are you can use them to reach up high to make a cut or down low in a shrub where it's hard to get into. Okay. With the anvil type, the width of this will keep you further away, so your cut may be 1/4 inch out further than you may want it. What you do is you bring up, you lock in there, then you start going up with this. If you need to reach up further than we just did with the loppers, this is a handy tool to have. It has the bypass cutter in here, has a handle which closes them and allows you to reach up probably a good 6 feet or so. The other good thing about it, you can adjust this head. Easy to adjust, as you can see, there we go. and you can make a cut at a better angle. Oops, let me go up here and pick my cut. There you go. For branches larger than 1.5 inches, you're going to need pruning saws. I have two types here. This one curved saw, sometimes referred to as a Grecian saw, is a very, very, very sharp saw. It generally has 2 rows of teeth, and you could probably cut down a redwood if you had enough time and enough energy. This is very good. The interesting thing about this saw is its cuts on the pulling motion, much like a lot of Japanese wood tools do. Now, you don't want to ever use a wood saw for pruning branches because the teeth are so that the green material in a branch will clog them all up. These are designed to displace and get rid of all that green sawdust that's gummy. These saws are replaceable. They come larger than this, and some of them even fold up and you can put them in a little case. I'm going to cut this branch, but first I'm going to make a small 3-point cut with this saw so that when I make my cut, if the limb were to fall, I don't want it to tear down. You can see because it's very sharp, this is a pleasant way to remove the tree. And if I let it go, you can see how this, if it were to tear down, this undercut here saves us from ripping down. And if I were to continue the cut, and this is where I wanted to cut, I'd do my finished cut right in here and keep going. For even a little bigger job, although I would be quite satisfied with that, you can use the bow saw. Now, we've used bow saws for years, but this seems to be the modern adaptation of the one that pruners are using now. And this too, the blade replaces. You merely undo this, easily take out the blade, remove the blade, that's it. Get a new blade, and then put it back in. Next, we have our pruning shears. What you want to look for in a pruning shear is a nice sturdy metal backing here. Something that you can handle weight-wise. And the one thing I like about these shears is this little rubber bumper here, so when you're doing a lot of pruning, it's easy on the shoulders. This is mainly used for hedges, soft material, little ends that you want to cut off. As an alternative to the manual head shears, we have the electric head shears. While it's intended to shear soft foliage, if you had a branch sticking up of this size, which is about 1/4 inch, it will take it off. While I enjoy using the manual shears to prune my yews, this works so much better. You can do your flat tops, shear your fronts, do a nice sculpturing job, even on these rounded parts. Of course, it gets interesting for the real high ones, which I neglected to cut down. Here we have a pole saw. Now, this pole saw is good for reaching high limbs that you might want to cut off. And this particular one will go to 12 feet. There are some that go to 14 feet, and I'm sure there are some that go much higher. Some that telescope, and I believe this one telescopes as well, to take you to your 12 feet. For demonstration purposes, I'm going to keep it down low. This particular pole saw also has a lopper, an anvil lopper, built into here. Along with the lopper that we just cut off the branch, it has this same saw that we showed before with a very sharp teeth, this Grecian type saw. And this blade also is replaceable. And this would be used to reach high branches up to 12 feet in which you would prune it. Just wanted to make mention of the chainsaw. The chainsaw is a pruning device. Most of us won't be using one. And my advice is to read a manual. If you don't read, have your children read it to you. But it's very important to follow the instructions because this is or can be a very unsafe tool. It has its uses for larger trees that would take you a long time to cut them down with some of the saws that I showed you. But as safety is the most important, there are certain things that you don't want to do with it, like cutting overhead or starting the chainsaw like you see all these woodsmen when they jerk it out of their hand and start it. But read the manual, and that'll give you good instructions and guidelines on how to use this tool. It works wonders when it works right. A good alternative to the chainsaw is a reciprocating saw, sometimes called a sawzall. They come electric, corded or uncorded. This is uncorded. And when they're outfitted with a pruning saw blade, they can become a good pruning tool. While it's not going to be the workhorse of a chainsaw where you can cut down large limbs, the regular homeowner is probably going to leave that to an arborist because it's a lot safer. But if you want to cut down a limb maybe 4 to 6 inches, this might very well be the tool. And one thing to be sure of is to wear your safety glasses. Well, that did a pretty good job, and it might have saved an arthritic shoulder. Now, before I'm done with this, I will cut it back to the branch collar. There is one pruner that every homeowner should avoid. They're very fast and very efficient and can do a lot of harm to your plants. Just a word about tool care. Your tools, in order to work fine for you, they should be kept clean, sharp, and then they'll give you a good cut. It's as important to know how to keep your pruners sharp as it is to know how to prune. Now, we're dealing with 3 basic types of cutting edges. We have the scissors edge, which can be found on the head shears. We have the anvil, which has 2 sharpening sides. And we have the bypass pruner, which everybody knows about. First, let's take a look at the bypass pruners that we're all familiar with. You have a single beveled edge here, and it passes over and shears on this flat edge. Now, we won't do anything with this flat edge, and we won't do anything with this back edge. But what we want to do is maintain this curved beveled edge. Now, most of the premier type pruners can be disassembled, and you could use a whetstone and oil. But out in the field, that's a little messy and a little more detailed. And what I like to use are some of these diamond files that don't require any lubrication, water or oil. Now, the first thing we would do is to use the coarse diamond, which is blue, and the fine diamonds are always red. And that seems to be universal regardless of the manufacturer. And what you want to do is start from the heel to the point, maintaining that bevel and moving in a shearing action. And you'll want to do that 4 or 5 times. And you can follow that up with the fine one. Of course, you could do it all day if you're not really satisfied how sharp it is. Now, some of the pruners are going to be very small down in here. And they also make a flat diamond file, but you always have to be careful which side the diamond's on. And do the same thing, and it allows you to get way down deep in the heel. And it does a great job. And these come in a variety of coarse all the way to fine. So while I don't happen to have a fine one of this, which I will be getting. Now, this is the anvil type, which we visited before, and it has a blade on both sides, or a point on both sides. So we will need to sharpen both sides, and it's done much in the same manner that we did the bypass. You can take the coarse one and just follow a shearing motion all the way down to the end. Now, this particular one doesn't show much of a bevel angle there to follow, but you'll get the hang of it. All you have to do, you don't want to go too deep, and you don't want to be too shallow. You pretty much follow the angle that was put on there when they ground it down. You want to do the same sharpening on the one side as you did on the other. So for instance, if I had done 5 passes on here, I would want to turn around and do 5 passes on this side. And that's just to keep the angle even on both sides. Now when you're done and you're pretty well sure that they're sharp, I would like to say at this time, don't test it out with your finger. Sometimes I even show to test it out with your thumbnail. I don't recommend that either. We're not here in pruning fingers. But you could try it on a piece of paper, which works very well and much better than a finger. Now for the hedge shears or scissors type shears, which is very therapeutic for me, you can use a combination coarse fine steel file. And carefully, I hold it here and follow the angle all the way up, same shearing motion. It will remove a great deal of metal matter. Start to go back and creates a sharp edge in no time at all. And when I'm doing hedges with this, my favorite tool, it gets very sharp indeed. Now if you have a burr, just slightly go across the bottom, absolutely flat, and remove the burr. Then you'll want to turn it around and voila, we have the same edge on the opposing side. And you shear it up. Here again, we don't want to test the sharpness on our fingers or any other living thing. But we could try it on this little piece of holly here, and you find it works very well. I guarantee it would work well. So after you've done pruning in the field and around your garden, you want to make sure you take your tools back and give them a good cleaning and care. The pruners, regardless of the size, should be kept clean. On the anvil type, you'll get debris down in here, as I have here, and that if you don't keep that clean, that's going to affect your cut itself. Once you've cleaned the debris off your tool, you can wash it down with warm water, warm soapy water. And if you're worried about any kind of infection that you might have carried from plant to plant, clean it with a 70% solution of alcohol or a 10% solution of bleach. If you use bleach, make sure you wash it good and clean because bleach can be corrosive to metal. After you're finished, clean and dry, wipe it down with an oily cloth, and you're good to go. Let's not overlook the importance of the small garden tool, hand tool. It's actually a miniature version or a smaller version of the larger tools and does pretty much the same job except in more confined areas. They'll be used in raised beds, containers, and along borders, any place generally where you're down to earth working. I have some examples here to show you, and I know that it was the original idea for your meeting is to have all your members bring tools together and show and tell, and that would have been fun, but it is what it is. So I have some examples here which I'm sure you're all familiar with and familiar with many more than I am. You have your garden trowel, the mainstay of any hand garden tool. You can do almost anything with this. You can dig, you can transplant, you can make furrows to put your seeds in with. You have some cultivators. This is a small fork. This is your cultivator, essentially a rake to cultivate in and around the plants. This is the dibbler. I'm sure many of you know about the dibbler. Very handy when it comes into planting bulbs. It makes a nice hole in there and you can drop in your garlic or your bulb or whatever you want to do. While it's a neat tool, you probably can do the same thing with your garden trowel, with your finger, or with a stick. This hula hoe is a smaller version of the one I showed earlier, and if you're down here weeding, this will make easy work of any weeds that you have. Now, like I say, among all of the tools that I've come across working on this project, there are some that are very interesting, and I'm not really sure of what they do, like this Korean tool. The only thing I know is that I wouldn't want to sit on it. Now, I've been asked from time to time if you only had one garden tool that you could have, that was it, what would it be? And my answer, the Hori Hori knife. I consider this to be the Swiss Army knife of garden tools. In Japanese, Supposedly, hori means to dig, dig. And this will dig all the way down to the handle and move heavy objects. Now the secret to its ability to dig is its design. They generally are very thick material. This is tempered steel, very, very thick material. Most of the ones that I've seen are probably stainless steel, but still thick. The tang, or this part, goes all the way through the blade, if you can see that. And that's the most important thing you can have in choosing almost any garden tool, but especially one that you're putting a lot of pressure on. Because if you buy one that's only hooked into here with maybe one rivet, sooner or later it will break, because when you're going to use this tool, you're going to try to move redwood trees, I guarantee you. Now it has two sides. One side has a serrated edge, which is very good for chopping, for cutting small branches or limbs around as big as your finger with saw them off. And the other side is your regular sharpened blade. Now this one isn't very sharp, but you could sharpen it. Be a little careful using it. This one has a notch in here, which is very good for cutting twine. Also good for opening bottles. So I was introduced to this tool about 4 years ago, and it's sort of become my best friend ever since. I wouldn't be without it. I highly recommend one if you don't already have it. Taking care of your tools will actually make them last longer and work better. I'm probably the worst custodian in the world for taking care of tools, whether they're garden tools or any other tools. But with my garden tools, like maybe many of us, when I'm done for the day, I'll just take and put it away in the garage or the shed and walk away. I won't bother to clean them or even take a closer look at them. Most of the time, I even leave my shovel standing out in the field, so at least I can know where I was working before. Now, while this is good for my recalling what I was doing and for my memory, it really isn't good for the tool. I'm going to try to do better, and I'll show you some steps on what I'm going to do. Now, bringing in the shovel, let's use a shovel for example. First, one thing you want to do is remove all this dirt on here. And the reason for that is because the dirt that's left on there has moisture in it. And the moisture will start the rusting process. Once I remove the dirt, I'll hose it down real good. Oops, some of that bumps. There you go. And dry it off with a nice cotton cloth. Wipe it down good, wherever it is. Wipe down the handle as well. Now's a good time to take a look at the condition of the shovel. You might have some early rust starting like we have here. The edge of the shovel is not as round as it once was, and that'll have to be taken care of later by some sharpening. But what I can do, and I'm sure we won't do this every time, take some steel wool, get in there and clean it up. Take a little bit of elbow grease and a little bit of time. We might not get it the very first time, but if we work at it, we can keep that rust off. Still have some dirt over here. Use a wire brush as well. I have a little wire brush here, like a little toothbrush made out of brass. To get it off, wipe it down. And that's not perfect, but it's not too bad. Then once you're done, take a can of some kind of petroleum, I can't say the name of it because I'm not supposed to do that, and squirt it down with a light spray. And this will keep the oxygen and the water off of it to keep it from rusting. Now the handle, this is a fiberglass handle, don't have too much to worry about. But if it's a wooden handle and it's starting, the lacquer is starting to come off of it a little bit, you could sand it down lightly and put a little linseed oil on it. I have some teak oil here that I use on there to cover it up. And you're good to go. Like I said, I don't expect, I'm sure I won't be doing it this way every time, but a good practice is to at least wash those tools down and dry them off and put them away. Now in some cases, the tools are in pretty bad shape. This trenching or tool has been sitting in my shed. I haven't even used it for years, and it's in pretty bad shape. I mean, the tool itself is still good shape. It hasn't rusted away or anything like that. And you can see up here the wooden handle is very, very rough. And I know that on some of my really old tools, like my rake, where I didn't bother to keep it moisture lubricated or covered, I could get splinters in it, which is not a good idea either. So in this case, just like before, we clean it off as much as you can, just like we did before. And when it gets down to the rust, your steel wool and your wire brush may not be enough. So you may have to take like a little rotary wire brush that fits in the end of the drill and take down and work on it. But it's a matter of time, keeping after it, and you can bring this back. It'll take a while. I've tried a couple, and as a matter of fact, I had one so bad that I was even considering going out and having it sandblasted like new and starting over again. So that's briefly what's needed to do every time you take your tools out. I'm going to try harder to do it because I want my tools to last longer, and I hope you will too. Thanks for sharing your time with me today while we're discussing the basic garden tools, how they're used, and how we can maintain them. And I hope that some of the information will be useful for you. I know we didn't have a chance to look at all the dozens and dozens of garden tools that are out there, but probably the only way to learn about them is to get out there and use them. So with the upcoming garden season to start, I want to wish you all the greatest garden season that you've ever had. Enjoy your gardening. Enjoy your life.